Good morning, everyone. Today's Shavuos Matamas. Today is Shavuos Matamas. It's a fast day, as you know. Um, there's a lot of history to it for Pius, so may we be zoche to see the good Shema for this year. It's Hashem. Today's shir is Lili Nishmas, Aaron Nachman, Suchakoin, Nishumach, Mashes, Abracha, Sabash, Malim, and Biyam Moshe, Ben Yosef, Mirin, Shos, Lavan, Aliyah. And first name if you saw Rachel Leah Rachel Bas Zelda Rachel Eliana B'Siyah Bracha Yisrael B'Risha Chaim B'Siyah B'Bela first name B'Soch Shar Chol Yisrael. Shout out to our good friends at the Imperial Advisory Group for their sponsorship of this year for this month. If you need help with your CFO stuff, please reach out to them at imperialgrp.com. Okay, here we go. Today we're learning the last Perek Yud, chapter 10 of Metzia. Tomorrow we start Bava Basra. This paragraph is going to talk about properties that are situated one on top of the other, like in a high-rise building. So, like a two-story house or multi-family dwelling, is what we call them here in New York. So, Perek Yud Mishnah Aleph Habayis v'Aliyah Shel Shnayim Shenafu. The two-story house belonging to two people collapsed. Shneihem cholkim be'etzim u've'avanim u'afa. The two of them divide the usable wood, stones, and earth that they find in the rubble, based on the size of the two apartments. So, if both apartments are the same size, each owner takes half of the material. We determine which stones were more likely to have broken. So they do an investigation to see the way to determine the way the house fell and which stones were more likely to have been broken in the collapse. And the owner of that story receives the broken stones. Yeah, they do an investigation, see what makes the most sense. If one of the owners recognizes some of the stones among the unbroken ones, not that he can take them even if they're more valuable than the other stones. But Allah slow min hacheshbon, they accounted toward the total amount of unbroken stones he's entitled to. So if he's supposed to get 50 unbroken stones, he can take the stones he recognizes as part of his 50 stones. Mishnah Beis. Habayis Haliyah Shoshna. You have a two-story house occupied by two people. The owner of the house lives on the ground floor, and the tenant lives in the upper story. If the floor of the upper story fell in, ve'ein bal habayis rotzeh lisakin, and the owner of the house does not want to fix it. Rei bal haliyah yorei v'dar lamata. The occupant of the upper story may go down and live below in the ground floor apartment. Ad yisakin lo es haliyah, till the owner fixes the floor of the upper story for him. Rabbi Yossi says, "Hatachto nosin es hatikra." The occupant of the lower apartment, the landlord, is required to provide only the wood of the ceiling of the lower apartment. The ceiling of the lower apartment is the floor of the upper apartment. And the occupant of the upper apartment provides the plaster that covers the wood, because it's not needed to strengthen the floor, but rather to ensure that it's smooth and flat. Since the upper apartment is livable without the plaster, the landlord is not chayav to provide it. Mishnah Gimel. Habayis of Haliyah Shel Shnayim Shenafu, a two-story house belonging to two people that collapsed. Amar Bal Haliyah the Bal Habayis Livnos. The owner of the upper story told the owner of the ground floor to rebuild his apartment so that the upper story can be rebuilt on top of it. But the ground floor's owner does not want to rebuild. Hare Baal Haliyah Bona Esabayas. The owner of the upper story may rebuild the ground for himself. The Darb is Sofa Achite Lois Yosef, and live in it until the owner of the ground floor pays him for his building expenses. But since the owner of the ground floor is chayav to ensure that the upper story can be rebuilt, the owner of the upper apartment has the right to use the ground floor until its owner pays for his share of the construction. Rabbi Yehuda says, even in such a case, the owner of the upper story is still living in his friend's property, since he thereby receives monetary benefit from his friend. Tzarich lahalos lo sachar. Rent for the time that he lives there is anyone who receives monetary benefit from someone else's property must pay for that benefit. Rather, in order to avoid having to pay rent, the owner of the upper story should rebuild both the ground floor and the upper story. Mikre and build the roof over the upper story. He should then live in the lower apartment until the owner of the ground floor pays his expenses. Since he now has another apartment available to live in, meaning the upper apartment, he does not gain any monetary benefit by living on the ground floor and does not have to pay the rent for living there. Mishnah Daled. Similarly, a chamber for an olive press was built in the rock of a mountain, like a cave. The Gina Achas Agavav, and a garden belonging to someone else was planted in the earth that covered the top of the chamber. The Nifchas, if part of the chamber's roof fell in, causing part of the garden to collapse, the owner of the press is required to repair the roof. If he does not want to do so, Hare Bal Hagina Yored Zoreya Lamata. Then the owner of the garden may go down and plant his seed below in the dirt floor of the chamber, Ad Shiyas the base Bado Kifin, until the owner of the olive press makes a new dome for his olive press chamber on which the garden can be replanted. If someone's wall or tree fell into a public domain, into a street really, and caused damage, under ordinary circumstances, he is not chayav to pay for the damages because it is an unavoidable accident. If the court gave him a set time, meaning 30 days to cut down the tree or to demolish the wall, but before he could take it down, if it fell and caused damage, and then the halacha is enough of a then if it fell with the time set by the court, potter, the owner is not chayav to pay for the damages. Since it was not expected that the tree or wall would fall so soon, its collapse is considered an accident. However, if it fell after the time set by the court had passed, if it fell after the time that the court had established, chayav, he is obligated to pay for any damages it caused because he was negligent by not taking it down when he was supposed to do so. It's a good thing it's a short perek on a fast day because my throat is kind of dry. So we've had throat with Metzia most of the program have been pretty long today. Shavuos of time is a short perek. Misha Mishnah Hey Misha Haya Kosto Samach Laginas Chaveru. Someone had a wall next to his friend's garden, but not for the Avanacha. And the owner of the wall replied, "They are yours. You may keep the stones, clear them away yourself." And someone though that the owner of the garden does not want the stones, we do not listen to the owner of the wall. When the stones remain his, and since they are causing damage, he is obligated to remove them. Mishakibel Allah, if after the owner of the garden accepted the stones and cleared them away, Allah, the owner of the wall, said to him, Helach es Yitziasecha, ani etol eshali. Here are your expenses for clearing away the stones, and I will take back my stones. And Shamallo, we do not listen. we do not listen to him, the owner of the garden may keep the stones. Since the owner of the garden already acquired the stones as his own, the owner of the wall no longer has any right to them. Socher as Poa allows us, Ima B'Tevin B'Kash, someone hired a worker to work for him gathering straw and stubble. And after completing the job, the worker said to the employer, "Give me my wages." And the employer said to him, take what you did, the straw that you gathered as your wages. And shaman low, if the worker does not want to be paid with straw, we do not listen to the employer. And he must give the workers cash, since the worker has the right to be paid with money and not with goods. However, if the worker acquired the straw as payment, and the employer then changed his mind and said to him, "Here are your wages in cash. I'll take back my straw." We do not listen to the employer. The worker may keep the straw. Since the worker has acquired the straw as his own, the employer no longer has any right to it. Hamaji Zerul Shusarabim. When one takes out his manure into the public domain to give to a farmer, Hamotzi. As soon as the one taking out the manure takes it out to the street, Hamazabel, and the one who is fertilizing his field has to remove the manure from the street and fertilize his soil with it. Since manure can cause damage if it is left in a public place, the person may bring it there only if someone is ready to take it away immediately. Ein shorin tit reshus harabim. One may not soak clay in a public domain in order to make cement or bricks. Ein lovnim levanim. One may not make bricks in a public domain because these procedures take a long time. If they're done in a public area, they will likely cause damage to people passing by on the street. However, a person will move the cement right away to use. Because for this, the clay must be kneaded for a long time and may cause damage to those passing by. Someone is building right next to the public domain, and he must bring stones to the building through the Rishus Harabim. Maybe Avanim, maybe. As soon as the person bringing the stones takes them into the public domain, and the builder must take them from there and build with them. The one bringing the stones may not leave them in a public place. The builder to pick up later, since people passing by might trip over them. You have to move it immediately. The aim is to get the stones cause damage during the short time they were in the public domain. The owner must pay for the damage. Even though he's allowed to bring the stones into the public domain in this manner, he must still make sure that they do not cause damage, and he's responsible if they do. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, "Apisakin who has malachto lifnei shloshim yom." One may even prepare in the public domain for his construction work for 30 days before he begins the work. The Chachamim allow the person to build up to 30 days before he begins to build. So even if the materials cause damage during that time, he does not have to pay for it. And finally, Mishnah Vav. Shnei, the last Mishnah in Bava Metzia. Shnei ginos zu al gav zeh, zu al gav zu. Two gardens are next to each other, and the surface of one is higher than the surface of the other. So there's a vertical wall of earth between them. Yark b'tayim, and vegetables are growing out of the vertical area between the two gardens. The roots of these vegetables are in the ground of the upper garden, while the plants themselves are hanging over the lower garden. It's a matter of dispute as to who owns the vegetables. Metzia says, "Shall Elyon, the vegetables belong to the owner of the upper garden because they are nourished from his earth." Yehuda says, "Shall Tachton, they belong to the owner of the lower garden because they're in his airspace." Rabbi Meir says, "Im Yitzie Elyon likakas afaro." If the owner of upper garden decides to take away his earth, he decides to move the dirt under his garden until his garden is level with the lower one. And kan yarak, there'll be no vegetables here. Since there'll be no plants if he removes the earth. Anything that grows in that earth should be his. Our Rabbi Yehuda says, if the owner of the lower garden decides to fill his garden with earth until it is level with the upper garden, and yarak, there will be no vegetables here, since there will be no plants if he moves his airspace. Anything that grows in that airspace should be his. Rabbi Meir says, since both of them can block each other, they can prevent the growth of the vegetables that they are both equal in this respect. And these arguments do not give either person an advantage. Rather, we check with these vegetables where these vegetables draw their nourishment in order to determine who owns them. So since they're nourished in the ground, they belong to the owner of the upper garden who owns the ground. Rabbi Shimon says, any vegetable that the owner of the upper garden can stretch out his hand and take while he's in the garden, belongs to him. The other vegetables belong to the owner of the lower garden. According to Shimon, by law, the vegetables all belong to the owner of the upper garden. However, it can be assumed that he gives up his right to the vegetables that he cannot reach. Hajj Metzia, and tomorrow we will continue with Bava Basra. Have a wonderful day, easy fast, and stay cool. It's going to be a hot one today in New York. Kol Tov.